This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, as thousands of people line the streets of London to watch the procession carrying the casket of Queen Elizabeth II from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall, where her body will lie in state until her state funeral Monday, we begin today's show looking at the monarch's legacy in Ireland. King Charles III was just in Northern Ireland Tuesday as part of his tour of sorrow after the death of his mother. He spoke in Hillsborough, Northern Ireland.
My mother felt deeply, I know, the significance of the role she herself played in bringing together those whom history had separated and in extending a hand to make possible the healing of long-held hurts. At the very beginning of her life of service, the Queen made a pledge to dedicate herself to her country and her people and to maintain the principles of constitutional government. This promise she kept with steadfast faith. Now, with that shining example before me, and with God's help, I take up my new duties resolved to seek the welfare of all the inhabitants of Northern Ireland.
During the Queen's reign, more than 3,600 people died over 3 decades in Northern Ireland in fighting between the Irish Republican Army and forces backed by Britain. In 1979, an IRA bombing killed Lord Louis Mountbatten, the Queen's second cousin. In 2012, the Queen famously shook hands with former IRA leader and Sinn Fein politician Martin McGuinness in Belfast. Last week, Sinn Fein leader Michelle O'Neill paid tribute to the Queen.
There's no doubt that she leaves a legacy of someone who reached out the hand of friendship, someone who advanced peace and reconciliation, someone who sought to build relations between those of an Irish and those of a British identity, and I think that was sterling work and something that I think that should be very much remembered for here on this island.
This comes as King Charles III visited Belfast Tuesday and met with members of Sinn Fein, which is now the largest party in Ireland after elections in May, where response to the Queen's death has been mixed. For more, we're joined by Eamonn McCann, journalist, writer, activist in Derry, Northern Ireland. Eamonn is a former member of the Northern Ireland Assembly. He also took part in the March on Bloody Sunday in 1972 and helped form the Bloody Sunday Trust. His 1974 book, War and an Irish Town, was recently republished. Eamonn McCann, welcome back to Democracy Now! For people who aren't familiar with the struggle, if you can lay out the history of the monarchy and Northern Ireland.
Well, the history of the monarchy in Northern Ireland is a somewhat ambivalent one. I mean, of course, the vast majority of unionist people are overwhelmingly Protestant. The Protestant unionist community has traditionally worshipped the royal family as being a symbol of their desire to be part of the United Kingdom rather than move into a united Ireland. So the Queen has been a figurehead for them, sort of, and an icon, if you like, of Britishness. So their fervour for the Queen, fervour of Northern Ireland Protestant unionists, has, if anything, been much more intense sort of than the fervour of the majority of the British citizens across the water. And after the formation, after partition in Ireland in 1922, almost exactly 100 years ago, the royal family really hinted or said outright on some occasions that they really sort of didn't reciprocate the loyalty which Protestant unionists in Northern Ireland showed towards them. When the Northern Ireland Parliament at the Stormont in Belfast, when the Stormont Parliament was opened in 1922, it was opened by George V, the monarch, came across and spoke. And during that speech, he expressed a hope that there would be reconciliation between all factions in Ireland, and that the disputes over sovereignty and the antagonism between Catholics and Protestants in the north, he expressed the hope way back in 1922 that this could be erased. And there's many perspectives in which you can see the events of the last couple of days, but it is, I think, politically meaningful to look at it and say, well, there is that royal family project, of course, brought to fruition not by Queen Elizabeth, but by the death of Queen Elizabeth, when once again sort of the royal family is associating itself to some extent, I wouldn't exaggerate this, but is certainly associating itself with advocates for a united Ireland. And this is bound to cause, over the coming weeks and months, considerable confusion and dismay among the unionist population of the north, and a certain, if there's such a thing, ambivalent euphoria sort of among Catholic nationalists who will see, in effect, what they see as the endorsement of the campaign for a united Ireland by the British royal family as a major step towards a united Ireland, and a way sort of leaving the unionist population sort of in the past, in history. Now, that's a very initial judgment. Obviously, these gestures by Prince Charles, King Charles, sorry, have only come sort of in the last week since the death of his mother, and we'll have to see how they play out. But certainly, I would say that at this point, sort of in less than a week after the death of the Queen, Irish nationalists are much more content with what has been happening than the traditionally loyal royalists of the unionist population. So that's a turn up for the books, if you like. Certainly it's a significant turning point sort of in attitudes in Northern Ireland and in both communities in Northern Ireland towards the monarchy. This could turn out to be very significant, or it could turn out to be a brief moment sort of which passes when it's undermined by events in the next a near future.
And Eamonn McCann, Eamonn McCann, following that up, the change in perspective and attitude of Sinn Fein toward the monarchy. I mean, clearly from the bombing that killed Lord Mountbatten in 1979 to the handshake of Martin McGuinness in 2012 with the Queen, and now with Michelle O'Neill, the current Sinn Fein leader, paying tribute to the Queen. Does this view of how the monarchy may be taking a position quite distinct from the elected leaders of the United Kingdom part of the reason why Sinn Fein has taken such a much more open view toward the monarchy?
Yes, I think that's true, and I think it's, in order to set the context for that, it's important to understand that the majority of people in Britain sort of have never actually felt a sense of kith and kin with the Northern Unionists here. I worked for 7 years in London, and in all that time, I worked as a labourer, so I wasn't moving in elite circles. And I don't think I ever met a single person who thought that a Northern Ireland was part of their country. They had no sense of kith and kin with the Unionists of Northern Ireland. I recall one of my workmates turning to me and saying, look, just explain to me, which part of Ireland do we own? And for a London labourer to ask you that tells you a great deal about the perception of English people towards the Protestant people of Northern Ireland. The loyalty of loyalists in Northern Ireland has never been reciprocated by the British people. And indeed, there is good evidence to believe in the historical records, that British politicians never really were concerned about bringing Northern Ireland with them. So, the Unionists who believe in themselves being part of the United Kingdom and who have ferocious loyalty to the British monarchy, they must be in a state of confusion, and fear would be putting it too strongly, but certainly they are anxious about their future as British Unionists in the future as we move to constitutional talks.
And I wanted to ask you about James Connolly was an Irish Republican, socialist, and trade union leader over 100 years ago. Back in 1911, he wrote a piece titled "The British Monarchy is an Affront to Democracy." What is your view in terms of the monarchy itself and the possibilities that being raised now for the first time to consider ending the monarchy?
Well, I think that the argument about the monarchy and the viability and acceptability of the monarchy is beginning to be discussed right across Britain. And of course, it's very early days yet, but of course, Queen Elizabeth, for 70 years, I mean, was the only queen, the only head of the monarchy that anybody in these islands had ever known. So her position wasn't really an occasion for controversy. It became like the wallpaper. It was just there, and events happened in front of it. But it's very doubtful indeed, whether King Charles, as he now is, King Charles III, will ever sort of attain that sort of more or less automatic loyalty sort of the population of Britain. Forget about Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland. In Britain, I think it's going to be more easy for anti-monarchists to make their case, because they won't be dealing sort of with that uncritical reverence which was directed towards Queen Elizabeth. And we've also got, at the moment, there's a little hint of what might be happening even today. I mean, we've learned sort of that at the laying in state, or whatever the phrase is, of the Queen's body, sort of at Westminster Hall, we're going to see Prince Harry, of course, who made the big mistake, as far as the royals are concerned, of marrying sort of an American divorcee of colour, and she's been frozen out, sort of in general terms. But Prince Harry is not going to be wearing his military uniform as he stands at his grandmother's casket, whereas Prince Andrew, the good friend of Jeffrey Epstein, and a man who, in the eyes of the British people, as of most people around the world, is entirely discredited. He's going to be there playing a prominent role, and it's already been announced that he will fill in for King Charles III on some ceremonial occasions in the future. So he hasn't gone away, Prince Andrew, and it will be interesting to see what the attitude of people is to the growing debate about the royal family when they factor in the presence and gaudy array of Prince Andrew. He's a big embarrassment to the royal family, although he hasn't been frozen out in the way that Meghan Markle has, and in the way that Prince Harry is beginning to be frozen out, sort of by the British establishment. So interesting times to come. We'll have to see how all that works out.
Just to be clear, Meghan Markle, who leveled charges of racism against the royal family, and Prince Andrew, who paid out a multi-million-dollar settlement in a sexual assault case involving himself related to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, and it should be remembered that, Prince Andrew, like the rest of the rest, doesn't really have money of his own. That was paid by the royal estate, by his mother, and the total sum that he given to Andrew to pay off his accusers and get him off the hook for being an associate and a co-participant with Jeffrey Epstein and various sort of sordid and discreditable episodes. £12 million of British taxpayers' money was paid to get Prince Andrew off the hook for all that. Now, we'll see when Prince Andrew appears sort of in his royal regalia and his military uniform, dripping with medals and regimental colours. When he appears in Westminster Abbey with that, I think it will tinge sort of the majesty of the event and majesty of the royal funeral. Already we've heard sort of people shouting sort of from crowds in Britain at Prince Andrew as the royal procession has trapezed from one place to another sort of over the last few days, and people shouting nonce at him and get out of it. So that's going to be interesting. But of course, the Queen stood by Andrew. She never publicly endorsed what he had done, but stood by him and had him to Buckingham Palace and all that. But it's a bit early to write the history sort of how that will affect the standing of the monarchy generally in Britain. But it's going to be one to watch.
And speaking of money, the future king, Prince William, if there is one, has just inherited a $1 billion estate, the Duchy of Cornwall. The Duchy owns a sprawling portfolio of land and property covering 140,000 acres, most of it in southwest England. But I wanted to ask you, Eamonn, about 1972, about Bloody Sunday, for people to understand the relationship between Britain and Northern Ireland. You were there.
I was there, and I mean,
Explain what
briefly, at the end
happened.
well, there was a civil rights march in Derry, January the 30th, 1972, in which about 10,000 people marched. They were marching against the military presence in Northern Ireland, specifically for the rights of people. It was a civil rights march. It wasn't a Republican march. It was broad support. And at the end of that march, it came into the Bogside, where I am now, which is a Catholic, working-class, nationalist area, overwhelmingly. And as the march came in and prepared for a meeting, I mean, Bernadette Devlin, whose name might ring a bell with some people who are watching, she was about to speak. People will be heard the crack of rifles coming from about 150 yards away at the bottom of Rossville Street. And I remember well that happening, and myself and thousands of others taking a few seconds, I mean, to realise that what was happening was that British soldiers were shooting at us. The paratroop regiment, or members of the first battalion of the parachute regiment, had come in behind the march as it came into the Bogside, and people stopped and assembled to hear a public meeting to be addressed by Bernadette Devlin and others. And of course, 13 people were killed, and another 13 were wounded. That was carried out. That massacre was carried out, as I say, by members of the parachute regiment, of which, as he then was, the Prince of Wales, i.e. King Charles III. He was the commander-in-chief of that regiment. So when Republicans now move to make peace, and they've met with King Charles yesterday on very friendly terms and so forth, that's in sort of savage contradiction to the rule of the monarchy, or the troops operating under the monarch's name, of the role that they had played back then. So there has been, a seismic and very dramatic change, sort of in the way Republicans, for example, in the Sinn Fein party, are willing to see sort of the British monarchy and relations with Britain generally. That's just 10 years ago. Stop me if I'm going on too long, sort of thing, in these answers. It's just 10 years ago that the Queen Mother died, i.e. the mother sort of Queen Elizabeth II. When she died, the leader of the moderate nationalist party in Ireland, Sinn Féin's moderate rivals, the Social Democratic and Labour Party, they expressed condolences. And the denunciation of them by Sinn Féin was ferocious to listen to, and made many members of the SDLP to wilt. The Social Democratic and Labour Party, SDLP, was on placards and sort of in slogans on gable walls. Sinn Féin turned it into SDLP, the Stoop Down Low Party, for doing what Sinn Féin has done over this last few days. So, sort of that's for complicated and subtle reasons. It's if you want me to go into sort of historical reasons, I just put this in mind. At no time in the history, indeed, of Northern Ireland, and not just of the Troubles, at no time has the majority of the Catholic nationalist people in Northern Ireland ever supported Republican armed struggle. I know the armed struggle because it is dramatic and people are killed and there's lots of coverage and all the rest of it. Sort of it's much more newsworthy than the dull, plodding business sort of ordinary bourgeois politics. The armed struggle is very dramatic, and a lot of people stood by, members of the IRA, Sinn Féin's a military wing at that time. A lot of people stood by them because they were nationalists. Many people supported the armed struggle through gritted teeth. But certainly there never was solid majority support among the Catholic nationalists of Northern Ireland for a strategy of violence to bring about a united Ireland or anything else. So in a way, when we talk about the adaptations that Sinn Féin has made, the contribution to the peace process and the adaptations that they have made in that context, to their attitudes to the British royal family, you should keep in mind that this isn't such in terms of abandoning the armed struggle and so forth. To an objective observer, this is something which has been sort of in the making, beginning to happen sort of over a long number of years. This has been the culmination of it. This has been the ceremonial confirmation of that relationship between the leadership of Sinn Féin and the British establishment generally.
And Eamonn, in terms of the evolution of the movement to free Northern Ireland, to reunite with Ireland, what do you see at the prospects now, especially now with the changes in the monarchy, with the Brexit vote that has made more difficulties with the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland being within the United Kingdom? What are the prospects that you see for the North reuniting with the Irish Republic?
Well, the honest answer is that I don't know, and what's more, neither does anybody else. I mean, there is a great confidence among nationalist and Republican leaders in Northern Ireland that we are now moving inexorably towards a united Ireland and a redrawing of all the constitutional boundaries sort of on the island of Ireland. If you're asking me personally, I dissent from that. I don't believe it is going to be that smooth at all. I don't think if you look... Irish people tend to look in history, sort of look at their own situation, sort of in terms of very long history, going back hundreds of years. I heard a nationalist politician talking a few months ago when somebody said about the trouble starting, and he responded from the platform, the trouble started when Cromwell landed. It's a lot of people see it like that, and it's whether a united Ireland comes about will depend an awful lot on relations between Catholics and Protestants, nationalists and unionists here in Northern Ireland, to the extent to which they are ameliorated. One thing we can say, that the idea of using armed struggle, using violence, or to coerce the Protestant community in the North into a united Ireland, that's gone. That's not going to happen anymore. The people who are advocating that and carrying that out have realised that it was never possible, and have abandoned it for constitutional politics. And what's happened in the last couple of days is confirmation of the sort of formalisation sort of that attitude. And we'll have to see what happens. There's a number of things to keep in mind here, but one of them is, I'll just mention this one, as I mentioned at the beginning, the people in England, Scotland and Wales, including the political leaders of Britain, including the Conservative Party, whether very right-wing and patriotic and the rest of it, they do not regard any part or any section of the Northern Irish people as an integral element sort of in British citizenship. And that's going to be very difficult. So as that becomes, it has already over the last couple of days become more clear, been spelt out for people. How the unionist population and unionist, there are sort of intransigent unionists, as there are intransigent everything. Whether they are going to weaken or soften their attitudes remain to be seen. I doubt it. But let's wait and see.
Eamonn McCann, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Journalist, activist in Derry, Northern Ireland. Eamonn is a former member of the Northern Ireland Assembly, also took part in the March on Bloody Sunday in 1972, helped form the Bloody Sunday Trust, author of the recently republished book, War and an Irish Town. Next up, The Storm is Here, an American Crucible. We'll speak with the New Yorker's award-winning war correspondent, Luke Mogelson. He's been in Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq, but he's talking about the war at home as he writes about right-wing extremism and the 2020 elections. Stay with us.